He survived the war, but alone. Some battles end, others never do. The story of the last soldier begins now, a chilling tale that blurs the line between the battlefield and the mind. What if the greatest enemy you ever faced was the one staring back from your own reflection? Stick with us as we unravel a mystery where the only witness is a man haunted by the ghosts of his past. This isn't just a war story. It's a journey into the heart of solitude and fear. It was dawn. The battlefield was silent, draped in a cold, gray mist that clung to the earth like a shroud. He stood up, his bones aching, his uniform caked with mud and something darker. He looked around, his eyes scanning the cratered landscape. No one was left. The symphony of destruction that had roared for days had faded into a deafening quiet. He was the sole survivor, a lone figure in a world remade by violence. The sun began to rise, casting long skeletal shadows from the wreckage of tanks and the broken bodies of trees. It was over. The war was over. He had won. Or so he thought. He took a hesitant step, then another, his boots crunching on the debris. The silence was heavier than any artillery shell, pressing down on him, suffocating him. He was alive, yes, but he was utterly and completely alone. He whispered into the cold air, his voice a dry rasp. "Where are they?" He expected no reply, but the wind answered, a low moan that snaked through the trenches and whispered secrets he couldn't decipher. The shadows moved, stretching and contorting in the morning light, playing tricks on his tired eyes. They looked like men, like soldiers, for a fleeting second, before dissolving back into nothing. But no soldiers returned. He called out again, louder this time, his voice cracking with a desperation he didn't know he had. "Answer me." Only the wind replied, carrying his own words back to him. He walked for what felt like miles, across fields that were once green, now scarred and barren. Each step was a pilgrimage through a graveyard of his own making. He saw helmets half buried in the mud, rifles snapped in two, a single boot lying on its side, waiting for a foot that would never come. He was searching for a sign, any sign, that he wasn't the last man on earth. But the further he walked, the more the truth solidified around him, cold and hard as steel. The world he knew was gone. His comrades, his enemies, all of them had vanished, leaving him as the sole custodian of their memory, a living monument to a forgotten war. He tried to march, to summon the discipline that had been drilled into him for years. Left, right, left, right. But every step echoed too loud in the oppressive silence. The crunch of his boots on the gravelly dirt sounded like a gunshot, making him flinch. The rhythmic beat of his own heart became a war drum, pounding in his ears, a constant reminder of his solitude. He stopped, his breath catching in his throat. He whispered to the empty sky, a question born of creeping dread. Am I the last? For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the silence itself seemed to answer. It wasn't a voice, not a sound, but a feeling, a profound and absolute certainty that settled deep in his soul. Yes, the word was not heard, but known. Yes, you are the last witness, the last memory, the last heartbeat on a dead planet. He stumbled, falling to his knees, the weight of that one word crushing him. He was no longer a soldier. He was a ghost, haunting the ruins of his own victory. The sun was higher now, but it brought no warmth, only a sterile light that illuminated his desolation. He screamed, a raw, primal sound, torn from the depths of his being, a howl of grief and terror and unbearable loneliness. But only his echo answered, mocking him from the distant, broken hills. The scream died in his throat, and the silence rushed back in, thicker and more menacing than before. That's when he knew. The war wasn't over. It had simply changed its location. It was no longer out there, in the fields and the trenches. The explosions were now the frantic beating of his own heart. The screams of the dying were the thoughts rattling inside his skull. The enemy was no longer a man in a different uniform. It was the suffocating quiet, the endless horizon, the crushing weight of being the only one left. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the numbness. He was trapped, not in a trench, not behind enemy lines, but within the prison of his own mind. A battlefield from which there was no retreat and no surrender. The enemy was everywhere because the enemy was nowhere. It was the air he breathed, the ground he walked on, the very fact of his own survival. He looked down at his hands, trembling. They were his hands, but they felt alien, like tools of a destruction he could no longer comprehend. He saw the ghosts of his comrades in the shifting mist, their eyes accusing. He heard their voices in the moaning wind, calling his name. He ran, but there was nowhere to go. Every direction led back to himself. And in that frantic, desperate flight from an unseen enemy, he finally realized the terrible, simple truth. He stumbled and fell, looking at his reflection in a dark puddle of rainwater. The face that stared back was gaunt, haunted, the eyes wide with a madness he recognized. He realized, too late, the enemy wasn't gone. It was him. All the men he had fought, all the lives he had taken, they weren't gone. They were a part of him now. He had absorbed their hatred, their fear, their final, silent screams. He whispered to the face in the water, a final, horrifying confession. I am the war. He survived the war, but alone. Maybe the battlefield was real. Maybe it was all a nightmare playing out in the shattered landscape of his mind. But some battles should never be fought alone. The ones we fight inside ourselves are often the most devastating. If you or someone you know is struggling with the echoes of their own battles, please know that help is available. Reaching out is a sign of strength. You can contact the Veterans Crisis Line by calling 988 and then pressing 1. Or by texting 838,255. You are not alone in this. Thanks for watching. Subscribe now, because some mysteries and some battles deserve to be understood.